Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, I don't even know what day it is. 15th of April, goodness me, on day whatever of lockdown. Welcome everybody. We will just take a little bit of time to allow everybody to hop on. We do find that once the webinar is broadcast, it does take a couple of minutes just for everybody to pop into the system. So while we're doing that, I'll just start just with a quick overview, and then Novell will do a welcome and a karakia, and then we'll get into the agenda of the day. So firstly, big thanks to Te Waka for partnering with Everest in regard to the webinars that we've been running. This is the third of our fourth, and a big thank you also to Leslie Ann Thomas and her team at People in Mind in Cambridge to the support that she's been providing through these webinars as well. So I'm going to, currently I can see we've got a huge number of people pouring in the door, which is fantastic. Just a few other bits of logistics. So this week you'll see that you only have a Q&A, not a chat function. We were finding that a little bit confusing. So if you're new to Zoom or you haven't used it much, you'll see that there's a Q&A button there, and feel free to load your questions up. We have been receiving your questions in the last week since our last webinar, and we've got those loaded up to answer as well. We'll also make this webinar available online afterwards if you need to go back and recap, or you want to share it with other people in your teams as well. So it looks like we've got a great number of people online already. So I'm going to hand over to you, Novell, to do the formal welcome, and then we'll jump straight in.
Right. Thank you, Senga. Thank you, Leslie and Meredith, for joining us today. And thank you to all the participants for taking the time out to attend the webinar. This is organized by Te Waka with Everest and People in Mind to help businesses owners and managers to deal with the COVID-19 situation. I'll start off with the karakia and I'll hand over to Senga. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana ate, ata kura he tio, e huka, e hauhunga, haumie, huie, tai kie. Thank you.
Kia ora, Novell. Much appreciated. Well, again, morena everybody. My name is Senga Allen. I'm the founder and managing director of Everest. Today we are without Greg Cately from our Everest team, as unfortunately he has a conflicting diary and there is a client with some urgent need. So on the panel today is myself, Leslie Ann Thomas from People in Mind. Many of you will have met Leslie Ann over the years, and Meredith McKenzie, one of our people and cultural specialists from Everest as well. So we've got lots of questions. Just a reminder that you can use the Q&A tab, which I think if I'm sharing my screen properly, you'll be able to see that. The chat function has been turned off, so that's the best way to ask questions. So we've got an hour this morning, and if we don't get to answer your questions directly, we will endeavour to do those offline for you. So don't fear, we are here for you. So I just want to talk a little bit about what the program or the agenda is for today. So we'll just give you a quick update on what's happened in the last week. Things have, I'd like to say, slowed down a little bit, but there's new information coming out pretty much every day if you're watching the media like I have been. We're just going to spend a little bit of time on managing remote employees. I'm fielding quite a few questions in this space at the moment. We've got a really extended Q&A session for you today, and a lot of the questions we may have covered previously for you, but we're getting new questions coming in all the time. So we figured it wouldn't do any harm to spend some time in that space. And then just getting your head into that, if you are a business owner, and we will be getting more clarity from the government later this week on potentially what those levels will look like, and then Monday next week some further clarity. But you could use this time for your considerations around preparing to work as well. Preparing to return to work, I should say. So that's a little bit about what we're covering today. I would like to just start off again with the qualification of saying that what we are providing you today is generalised advice from the sources that we are receiving that information is the COVID website, the Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment's website, the Ministries of Health's website, so various public forums, and also our specialist advisors. If you have particular information or advice that you need, we may not be able to cover that directly, but I would encourage you to reach out to us so that we can help you specifically. So that's just a little bit of a qualifier for you today. So what has happened in the last week? So I'm just going to take this little piece here and give you a little bit of info. So there was some revision late last week around the minimum wage update after employers saying, hey, what do we do if we can't afford to increase minimum wages? So there is some more clarification on MBIE's website about this. And Leslie Ann, you and I were having a chat offline around this. Do you want to give some perspective about what that minimum wage, implications could be for some employers?
Sure. So, I mean, there's two parts to it. So those staff that are working and staff that are not working. So if you have staff who are working, they must be paid at least the minimum wage, the new minimum wage for the hours that they're working. And if the staff are not working, then you need to carry on perhaps with what you're doing if you can't put the wages up right now. But as soon as you can do that, you need to backdate any increases. So you've still got the requirements, just in two different stages. Those who are working now is immediate, and those who are not working, you have the ability to be able to do it a little bit later, but make sure you backdate it to 1 April.
Wonderful. Thanks, Leslie Ann. So as I mentioned before, we are a few days out from getting more information about what future levels might look like. We saw what level 3 looked like very for a short period of time. But we will get some more clarity about that. And you would have seen also yesterday the government providing more information about economic modelling, and in particular what unemployment rates might look like, and that could potentially be quite scary in some areas. But there is more information available if you're wanting to while away some hours understanding economic modelling. Secondly, we've seen the government announce just over a $3 billion business tax package yesterday and more business support. And I'm not a tax expert, so I'm not going to go into that. But if you are interested in finding out more information, there is this tax loss carryback mechanism that they are going to be bringing in. So if you've had a profit last year and a loss this year, there may be some tax credits available in that space. And then also the tertiary student support package. So, and again, I'm not going to spend any time in that space, but this is, some of the new stuff that's come up in the last week. So the other, I'm keen to get the panel's view on this, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective around, and we're all doing this in different ways, and it is very much about the connection that you have with your employees. And I know when everybody is really, really busy, it would be, it would be common to just put your head down and get on. Meredith, you've been dealing with lots of employers and lots of remote scenarios. What's some of the best, ways of managing remotely that you're seeing at the moment?
I've also been listening to lots of podcasts, so a number of leaders are talking about what is working, not just in this crisis, but in previous crises as well. And it is about communication and as often as possible. And if you feel like you're repeating yourself, that's okay. That's what good leaders do. It is also good to check in, like at the beginning of a Zoom meeting, just check in with your team. How are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 today? It might be that actually you're feeling about 6 because of something that's happened, or you might go, well, actually today's an 8 and I'm really enjoying it. If someone gives you an answer of a 4 or 5, then take the communication offline and check in with them, see if they just need to take a break or do something different for a little while. And if people have things going on in the house which are making life a little bit challenging to work at home, then acknowledge that and see what can be done to help them out, or to make allowances or any of those things. And probably just a reset on expectations of levels of productivity. In some cases, you actually get work done, the same amount of work done in less time. That does happen. But then the extra time, just let them do whatever they need outside of work. So if they can get the workload done in 4 hours instead of 8 hours, absolutely fabulous. And the rest of the time, they don't actually need to be pretending to work. So yeah, be realistic about what's possible and how long it can take and how it can fit around life.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions we've had in previous webinars has been about, so if I'm paying my employees up to 80%, does that mean that they only have to work 80%? Leslie Ann, you might have a view on that.
No, it doesn't, but I guess it comes back to the quality of the conversation that you've had or the proposal that you've put in front of your staff.
Yeah.
And also the kind of employer you are, and whether you actually just want to say, actually it's okay if you do drop back to 80% and drop back to 80% of your hours. Reality of staff, I think, majority of staff who are working from home, when they've got that quiet space to work and they are actually more productive. So as Meredith said, it's probably quite good to not worry about it if they're not doing all of their full hours, so long as they're getting the jobs done that you're expecting them to get done in that time. Doesn't really matter if they're not working the full hours. I'm just going to add to what Meredith said, probably just around not just the leadership and the management of those teams, but some of the neat things that I've been seeing is some bigger teams having some form of social engagement online with their team, and so just looking after that aspect of a team as well is something to have a think about.
Yeah, so our team had a social event Thursday at 4 o'clock. Most people had a glass of wine in their hand and we were wearing silly hats. That was our theme last week. I'm not actually sure what our theme this week is, but there will be one, knowing our team. So, and it's fun. It's there's a little bit of work chat, but mostly it's just how you're doing and what's going on, and have a good laugh with each other.
Yeah, and I think it's easy, if you've got a small team, you probably know your team quite well. When you're getting into hundreds of employees, this is where you've got to rely on your leaders as well to actually, be that conduit, to be that connector. So making sure that people, have the ability to connect and that you understand, what might be going on in the world and in their world in particular. So, if you've got employees who are quite needy is not the right word, but you know what I mean, where they are looking for direction more often, or they're looking for feedback and guidance, then leaving them without communication at the moment, could be quite challenging for them. So this is where, as a leader, it's going to be really important for you to know who your people are and making sure that your team, are being guided and looked after and are being assured even sometimes that everything is going to be okay. And it will be, but it's just going to take a bit of time. So I just I'm not going to spend too much in the space, but just thinking about, what are you doing? What were you doing previously at work? What could you do? How could you keep together remotely? I think is really important. I'm seeing that statement used a lot at the moment, and making sure that, that you are an ear when you need to be. And carry on the things that you were doing, your team meetings, your one-on-one meetings, those types of things as well.
One of the other challenges of working remotely is usually your home office isn't set up as well as your work office. So like, for example, my desk at home, I can't raise and lower it. And I've had to make myself a footstand to be able to be comfortable. And the first week I hadn't done that. Didn't have time to think about it, and oh my goodness, what a difference it made when I did finally do something like that. It made a big difference to how comfortable I am sitting here. And the other thing is remind people to get up and move. If it's get up and go to the kitchen, that's fine. It might be get up and walk around the house and then back to your desk, whatever, but moving is probably even more important when you're sitting at your home office, then, because naturally it happens more often in the real office.
Does moving to the fridge count, Meredith, on a regular basis?
Well, I had a day last week where every time I had to write a new letter for a client or start on something, oh my goodness, here we go. And I just developed this not particularly helpful routine of getting up and getting to something to eat, and then 2 seconds on, I don't know, Facebook or pick up a book or something, and then finally in the right headspace to come back and work. And I just said to go, this is my day. This is how it's going to happen today. I have a deliberate 5 to 10 minute break between each chunk of client work, which actually is not bad. Just I think the eating bit needed to. It's got better.
It was Easter, so you know,
Yeah.
hey, there was chocolate in the house. It had to be eaten.
There still
Hey,
is.
just we'll keep moving. So during the last week, we've been fielding lots of questions, and I've popped them into the system here so that everybody can have a nosy at them, and we'll answer them as we go. And I'm noticing that we are getting some questions coming in, and we will come back and answer those as well. So don't forget to hop online and ask other questions in that Q&A box. So the first question is around, you know, hey, I had somebody on a 30-day trial, and that was due to finish during the lockdown period. So, you know, what happens? Do they just naturally end, or do we carry that over? So anyone from the panel, either Leslie Ann or Meredith?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this. It depends what's in your employment agreement. If you're relying on it as a way to protect you from a personal grievance, there has been no change in the law, and there's been no rewriting of your employment agreement unless you actually mutually agreed and signed a piece of paper. So 30 days still stands, or 90 days, which is the one that's available by law to those under 20 employees. So no change unless it's a genuinely agreed change in the case of 30-day, because 30 days is different from the legal 90-day. However, if it's the 90-day trial, do not expect it to be magically extended and rely on it to dismiss someone without good process. That would be very, very expensive mistake.
Yeah, fantastic. Coolio, we'll keep on going. So we've had heaps of questions around Easter holidays, 80% wages, how do we manage that? So I'm going to ask Leslie Ann to answer this question because she's the specialist in this space. Apparently I'm not allowed to call you an expert, is that right, Leslie Ann? You didn't like that last week. So talk us through this one, because many of us have either had people who are due for statutory holiday payments this week, or have people who have been at work and are due statutory holiday payments. So talk to us about that.
So the normal tests of if it's a normal working day, usual working day for the employee still apply. However, if you're paying the 80% of wages, that's probably your new relevant daily rate or weekly pay. So your public holidays can be split into that 80%. And so no, you don't have to pay the full for those days, but just be very careful if your staff are working. You know, if you don't require them to work on a public holiday, make sure that's very clear to them. But if they are required to work on a public holiday, then the usual rules sit around time and a half and a day in lieu later on. But if 80% is your wage budget, or if the subsidy is your wage budget, that gets spread over the normal working week, inclusive of those public holidays. Yeah, it's a lesser pay effectively for those days for those who are paying less than 100%.
And just a cautionary note, team, Easter Sunday is not a public holiday, is it, Leslie Ann?
No, I get plenty of calls every year around that.
Yeah.
Some of the same clients quite regular, including my sister. So no, Easter Sunday is not a public holiday, but there are restrictions around trading. There
are, absolutely, except for this year, which was a little bit strange. Best time to go to the supermarket on Sunday, just quietly, it was. So hopefully we've answered that question for you. No, you don't have to top up over and above the 80% for those public holiday payments. So that's correct, Leslie Ann? Correct, yes. Yeah, thank you. Right, so this is another one that we've got lots and lots of questions that are coming above. So those that are paying, you know, above the 80%, and are topping up, how does the Good Friday and Easter Monday happen in that scenario? I had a good conversation with NB around this. So your subsidy can be used to pay for the public holidays. So if someone's, let's say they're on a weekly pay and they work 5 days a week, and they're on 100%, 80% is probably covered by the wage subsidy in the top up,
and then maybe one day that extra 20% might be covered by annual leave, and you would still use annual leave and use the rest of the wage subsidy in your top up to cover those public holidays.
It is a little bit confusing, isn't it? I can see, how businesses are trying to grapple with this. And, it's one of those areas that, getting advice, I think, is really important at the time, isn't it, Lesley-Anne?
Absolutely, and I think, employees do have an understanding by far that the employer's got a limited pool of money that they can play with. So the typical rules have to get varied a little bit in order to be able to deal with what pool there is of money to pay out to staff.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks for that, Lesley-Anne. Right, so this is our scenario. We've got a 70-year-old who is not able to work under the level 4, obviously. And the questions around level 3 and level 2, look, we're all just assuming and making, wild guesses about what that's going to look like. So we don't have any more insight into level 3 and 2 than anybody else in the country at this stage. So it would be best guesses around this. But, what do we do as leaders and managers where we've got maybe an older worker who is really wanting to come back to work and perhaps, is quite strong in their view about returning to work? How would you manage those scenarios, Meredith?
So I've had the privilege of working with a reasonably large essential services client, and there's actually quite a lot of guidance about what people should stay home or not stay home. Ministry of Health guidelines around existing conditions, and then there's this general 70 years and older. So it's really about how safe the workplace can be for that person, and whether you and they consider it as genuinely safe for them to be at work. So it depends what your business is, what the job is, and how safe you could possibly make them. If you feel that it is too risky for the business and you cannot ensure their health and safety, then you can require them to stay home, but you will have to pay them. How much you pay them, slightly different question, depends what's happened with your consultation and with your other staff. But if there is work and they want to work, but you're saying they can't, you need to pay them. And I can't answer the level 2, level 3 difference. At that point, it's probably going to be how risky is your region and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and whether an essential service or a business that hasn't been able to operate as well. So what that might look like in the future for that age group. I mean, I think we all are seeing the daily media around the impact for our older community members and our older workers, and the risk that this, terrible pandemic, is causing to that age group.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. Now, I'm just going to pause for a minute. We have got a couple of questions that are coming through. So,
there's one about if you're paying people less, can you expect them to work their normal hours?
yes.
What I would say is it does depend on how much you pay them normally. So, for example, you may be willing to have a differentiation between your senior level people who have very big pay packets, and if you've negotiated with them to drop their salaries but keep working because you need them to work. One thing to discuss is that if 4 people accept an 80% pay, then you've saved the 5th job, basically. And if that's the level of financial hardship you're under, then that's the conversation. We actually want to save jobs. If everybody keeps their jobs, then we need to drop 1 in 5 workers, for example. So be really upfront with your team as to why you're even thinking of doing this and just how drastic is it. And then in terms of how much work there is to do, can you ask them to work the normal hours? Again, be realistic. If your workload has dropped, which is why your income has dropped, then surely the workload of all your staff has dropped too.
Yeah.
However, it might not be the case for your situation, in which case there's a bigger conversation to have, and I can't really answer that specifically, but I do wonder if your income's dropped 20-30% that you need to have this discussion, then why hasn't your workload dropped? So have that, check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim's asked, just on our 70-year-old, can we ask them to take annual leave if there's no work for them as well? And we've had this question come up lots about, you know, when you start consultation about people taking leave, when does consultation end? When are we, you know, potentially unilaterally changing people's requirements, those sorts of things. So, Lesley-Ann, do you want to talk us through that scenario? Because it's something that's come up regularly, and there's a lot of commentary by different legal minds around, you know, what can you do in these scenarios, what's legally enforceable and what's not.
So I'm always going to go back to the quality of the conversation that you have with the employee. I think there's a really good advert on TV around budgeting with a lovely Māori lady and how she educated her son around how much money there is to spend on things. And that quality of that conversation that she refers to is exactly what you should be taking into your employee discussion with them. So getting them onto the same page wherever you can is going to make consultation a lot easier, and really good decisions are going to be made. If you've gone through consultation fairly and properly, then you do have the ability to be able to direct an employee to take leave with 14 days notice, but you do have to go through consultation first. And so I'm going to keep saying it comes back to the quality of the conversation and getting them to understand why you want them to be at home and not at work, but also you listening to them as to why they want to be at work and not at home. We're still waiting for the level 2 and 3 information to come out, so that might have some more guidance around what will happen with our older population in terms of work. I'm just guessing that it may not. So good consultation, good process, and ultimately, yes, you could direct somebody with 14 days written notice to take leave after consultation.
Lovely, thanks, Lesley-Ann. Keep on going. So, so there's a fair bit around the statutory holidays in this question and stuff we may have covered, but how do we treat statutory holidays and pay if we've received the wage subsidy and paying below full wages? So I think we've probably already covered that, but we'll just recap on, you know, what your payment's likely to be in that scenario, Lesley-Ann.
So yep, so if you've got your budget for your wages week in, week out, with whether there's a public holiday or not in terms of through the lockdown, then that same budget's still going to apply for any week where there's a public holiday. So public holidays will be a portion of your total wage bill for that week. Yep.
Absolutely. So if you're down to 70% or 50% or only paying the subsidy for the public holiday, then that's where, you know, that day that was a public holiday will be paid as a portion of that, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah, lovely. So if we go back to work before the 12 weeks, gosh, wouldn't that be lovely? How do we treat the subsidy? Do we continue to pay it to workers? Is it paid on top of their hours worked? Who would like to answer that question?
Do you want me to, Meredith? Look, the wage subsidy there is to help the employer keep employees retained and on their books as employees. So you may have to return any unused subsidy if you're not still using it to pay and retain staff. More will probably come out about that later on through the official channels. But generally speaking, you can use it towards your overall wage bill for each staff member. So it might help pay for the hours that are worked. But if they're working the irregular hours, then you would be expected to pay the irregular hours, and you'll use the wage subsidy to help pay for that if you still require that subsidy because your turnover is still down.
Yeah. And the next question around if we go back into lockdown, do we resume reduced wages and paying the subsidy? I think we'll get a lot more clarity about that should that happen. I would envisage that it would be very similar to the scenarios that we are dealing with now, but it really depends on, you know, what financial support's going to be available moving forward, and the government has said that they will make further, you know, information available about that should we have to go back into lockdown. So again, we're probably in guessing mode about what that would look like, but you would expect it to probably be similar to what we are facing at the moment.
Agreed.
So, question that's come in: can a business who's employing a full-time contractor pay for the wage subsidy, or the contractor themselves? And the question here is around that the answer is around that the contractor should be applying for it themselves. Am I correct on that one, team?
Yes, they are self-employed as a contractor, so there is the ability for a self-employed person to apply for the subsidy.
Absolutely. So the words there are wage subsidy. Your contractor is not receiving wages from you, so they should be applying under their own self-employment criteria. Okay. So how do we treat statutory holidays in a payroll system? And I know, Lesley-Ann, this is your area of expertise as well. Do we top it up? How is it being noted? So this person's actually using ACE, and I know there's lots of different systems out there. Any guidance on that one, Lesley-Ann, for us?
Most of the payroll providers have given some guidance around how to process the wage subsidies, usually as an ordinary earnings taxable allowance. And so that's exactly how we've been processing it in our bureau. And we've just been noting that the public holiday has worked or not worked. If it's been worked, then we're applying the worked rules. But if it's not been worked, we're just saying it's a public holiday not worked, and still continuing to pay wages and wage subsidies and top-ups through the allowance system.
Nice, thank you. So this one was a goodie. And everybody gets a little bit confused about this. So this is a good scenario to work through. So we've got an employee that regularly works 12 hours on a Friday, and he worked on Good Friday. Does he get paid in time and half for the 12 plus a day in lieu, or does he get time and a half for what he usually gets paid, and then 4 hours at 2.25? Lesley-Ann, it's a relatively simple formula for this one.
Well, Meredith and I had quite a good discussion about this yesterday, and I might get Meredith to unmute and maybe help chip in here, but the base, you've got to go back to what your employment agreement says around a scenario like this, and how they define ordinary earnings and how they define when time and a half is paid other than on a public holiday. In this particular scenario, the conclusion that I really came to say is, look, what do you normally do when it's not a public holiday? So they normally pay 8 hours at a regular rate, 4 at time and a half. And my view is that you would apply time and a half again to all of those hours that are worked. So you might end up with 8 hours being paid at time and a half and 4 hours effectively being paid at 2.25. And I think that's the good faith approach to be taking around that. Meredith, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. That's the conclusion we came to, because the relevant daily pay for that person is already 8 hours paid at a regular rate and 4 hours paid at time and a half. So you just need to put another 50% on all of that. And so the conclusion we came to is bonus for the worker, not quite so bonus for the boss, but that's the good faith way to do it.
Yeah. Somebody's chipped in, thank you, where they've had a situation where they've been overpaid several weeks. So this will be the subsidy or the leave payment, probably the subsidy, for one staff member who resigned within the 12-week time frame. And the government has advised her or he this morning that they're not required to repay it, but to use it to subsidise other wage payments. Of course, I would take your own advice around that if you do get into that scenario, but this is what's happened for one person based on a resignation that's occurred within the subsidy payment period. Just while I'm on here, Kylie has asked a question around navigating those conversations, those good quality conversations that you talked about before, Lesley-Ann, and I know Meredith, you as well. If we need to reduce staff down to 80%, do we just have a conversation with them? Do we provide a letter? How do we navigate? And, essentially this person might be able to only do an hour a day. What would be the best way to approach that? Advice for Kylie, please.
I think it would be worth having the conversation, voice, face-to-face if you can, Skype, whatever, and then follow up with something in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good practice. Yeah.
And the reason for that is that if they get agreement at the time, that's fabulous, and and say thank you for our conversation, as we've agreed, blah 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 blah, because later if people are facing financial stress, they can get very stressed and suddenly go, no, I didn't agree to that, blah blah blah. But if you've documented it, even sent an email immediately after your conversation, you can use that as your paper trail.
Yeah.
I'd also be asking the employee to return an email back to say yes, that is what was agreed to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good practice, and something that we, outside of any crisis situation like we're in now, we would always advise great paper trails, make everybody's lives a little bit easier. We've got questions coming in thick and fast at the moment, so I'm just going to pause and answer some of these. Vicky's asked if we have an employee who has not supported the proposal to reduce their wages, and every other staff member has, what do I do? And actually, I've had a couple of scenarios like this where that person, an individual has actually said, no, I don't agree to that. So what can I do? The harsh reality is that you are getting into then some consultation about that their role may be surplus to requirements if they can't, if there is not an agreement there, and there may be, some further conversation, some reconsultation around, so what are the other options? Because we are in a very different scenario than we've ever had to deal with previously. Any thoughts on that, Meredith or Lesley-Anne?
Yeah, and I think that's where your consultation is so important, because it's about the reasons we're doing this are X, Y, and Z, and share as much as you can relevantly. You don't need to share all your business secrets, but make sure that they genuinely understand why you're doing this, and that you're doing it evenly so that you can save jobs, everybody's jobs, and then and you could consult on the fact that the alternative is that you have to consider redundancies. And in the end, you're going to make a business decision based on you've had the consultation, you've heard feedback, you've answered as much as you can on the feedback or incorporated it, whatever, and then you're going to make a decision and move ahead. And I'm aware that some lawyers are saying it has to be by mutual agreement, but just if you're restructuring and you have a genuine business reason and you've done good process, then you're making a business decision, and you have to do that. Yeah. So people don't have to agree to be made redundant, but you still make them redundant after good process.
Yeah, absolutely. Lesley-Anne, views?
Similar views. At the end of the day, there's a pot of money and it's not exhaustive. And so we are not necessarily looking for agreement, but consultation around reducing to 80%. And I think the majority of the employees are going to want a job, even if it's 80%, then no job at all. So it's getting that message across, I guess, in a really good way with that employee to say, look, this is the reality. I can't pay you the 100% that you want to be paid.
Yeah. Yeah, and Kylie, if they don't agree, and I think Meredith has covered this, you don't agree, you may not agree to being made redundant, but it is a business decision at the end of the day. And this is, as long as you've got a good paper trail, that you've done all of these things around consultation, that you've tried to explain, you've shown the data if you need to, or at least at a high level, and that, you are, trying to protect the employment of all of your employees, whether it's 2 people or 50 people, and one person is resistant against that, then you are going to move ahead with that direction. So it's a very hard scenario, and I know a lot of employers are dealing with this, where employees are digging their heels in and saying, but I need 100%. And I'm sure we could all relate to that, but this is a scenario that none of us have ever had to deal with previously.
And if you can, listen to your employees if they are really that desperate. Can you top them up with annual leave? Can you top them up with annual leave in advance that you're allowing them? Is there some way to actually hear what your employee is saying and help them out?
Yeah, and it could be a grave financial situation on the other side of the table, of course. If someone leaves within the subsidy, is it built into the gross for holiday pay, Lesley-Anne?
Yes, it is. It probably answers the question from Brigitte. Sorry if I've said your name wrong, Brigitte. But if someone, and here she's asked, if someone resigns and you decide to put them on garden leave, do you have to pay them monthly notice at the new set 80%? Most likely that notice period is going to be 80% if that's what you've agreed to for the staff for the duration of the lockdown. And it might be that you are topping it up to 100% after lockdown if everyone's back to normal. But she also asks, as does Anne, around that annual leave and how is that paid out. So the subsidy is built into holiday pay calculations because it's ordinary earnings. And annual leave is paid out, any older leave is paid out at the higher of average or ordinary earnings. And any newer leave is paid out at 8% of earnings since anniversary to when they leave.
I'm glad you know all that stuff, Leslie Ann. I do too, somewhere in the back, deep memories of payroll, but yes, it's good to have that advice and direction.
Hopefully your payroll system, if you're on an automated payroll system, will calculate that for you. So do a dummy run and see what it looks like, and then if you need advice, ring Leslie Ann. She's great.
Yes. Please do. Okay, moving along. So we've talked a little bit about this, the protocol for reducing employees' salary, recommended notice period, those sorts of things. I think we've probably covered this one at the majority of time. The notice period about reducing or consultation in general. Look, in the old world, if we call it that, the more time you could provide somebody to consult, you know, absolutely the better. Now, you know, we're sort of saying if you can, 48, 72 hours notice. If you're in a real financial pickle, you're going to potentially have to move faster than that. But the key thing is about those really good conversations that Leslie Ann has mentioned earlier on, and around, you know, providing as much information as you can about why we're looking at moving to 80%, and we're seeing more and more of this now. I think a lot of employers potentially for the first 4 to 6 weeks went, okay, let's just stick to 100%. Now, you know, as things are going on, there may be some reductions. So public holiday pay, you know, at that, what's the normal week look like now? Is it 80% is your normal? And normal hours, we talked about that as well. So hopefully we've covered that, whoever asked that question prior to the webinar today. So again, I think we've covered this one as well, but Leslie Ann, do you just want to tap over that one again and just provide that clarity?
Let me just read that. That's fine. Yeah. It depends on how much leave they want to top up. I'm working with a physiotherapy team at the moment, and some staff have just topped up annual leave to the balance of what they feel they need to live on, and other staff have wanted to go to 100%. Generally speaking, it's, if you're a 5-day week, it's 1 day of annual leave if you're topping up the extra 20%. So it's 20% of what a normal week would look like for the employee.
So if you're doing an 80-hour week, that might be quite different than others who might be on a 37 or a 40-hour week. So have a look at that as a ratio, and you know, work out what that leave portion is going to actually be. Okay, so before we jump into some of the others, let's go back and have a look at some more questions.
There's one here about casual employee. So if you were doing the right thing and paying them during lockdown when nobody can work, good on you. Once you get back to working, then it goes back to they're a casual employee. So if you have work for them, they get paid. If you don't have work for them, they don't. But be aware that if beforehand they had a pattern of work, that actually, if you're really honest, they were a permanent part-time employee or permanent employee, then treat them that way and handle it that way going forward. So yeah, genuinely casual goes back to being genuinely casual.
Yeah, thanks June for jumping online and popping that question in. It was in your email that you flicked over, so I was going to ask that one, but it's good that you've done that as well. So if you start work again and you're owning, Yvonne's asked about a takeaway or maybe someone through there, do we pay them for their actual hours worked if it's more than 80%, or just still the 80%? And I think we'll get more clarity on this, but if we're using the rules up until now or the guidelines around that, you know, how are we working out that potential 4-week averaging and things like that? Have you got a view on that, Leslie Ann, that Yvonne's asked?
Let me read his. Where is it? Oh. They come back to me in a moment. I'll just compose it in my head.
I was thinking about this one, that if your customers are not there, so if you are genuinely less busy and less income, then have that conversation with your staff, because if you cannot afford to pay them 100%, then you've got a business reason to have the conversation and talk about an alternative, even if it's temporary. And if they agree, then that's easy. You just get agreement and document that and carry on for whatever period of time is necessary. It is very hard to put a reason for the change back on there, but it may be, you may put in financial stuff as soon as our turnover returns to normal, or our number of customers or whatever, then that's good. Or you could put a review date. We're going to review this in 2 months' time, or we're going to review this every month, or something along those lines, just to be, I mean, it's going to be hard to be definite, but it might give some security to your staff that you're not going to drop their pay to 80% and then never return it to normal.
Yeah, be quite, I did advise a client on a similar situation yesterday, be quite black and white about the dates that this applies for and what remedies you might be able to address. It might be that you can come back later and do a top up for those hours when business is back to normal trading. So what can you do that's going to make it easier for the employee to understand and accept?
Yeah, it is a tricky one, isn't it? Because we're every day and week we're seeing new scenarios about what if and how about this and what does that look like. So it's a real changing face of employment than we've ever dealt with in our careers, I would envisage. So I think a lot of this boils down to the types of conversations, and we talked about this managing remotely earlier on, but even just the levels of good communication you're having with your employees is so important now, and that if you've got adversarial relationships or relationships that aren't working well, it makes those conversations more difficult, doesn't it? So how do we actually, how do we repair some of that? How do we communicate well so that people can be, clear about what their options might be moving forward? And you might have, as an employer, have to come up with lots of different scenarios of what your future payments are going to look like, depending on what subsidies may or may not be available. And so Lisa's asked about an employee who is stuck overseas, but he's not a New Zealand resident, but MSD have said that he is eligible for the subsidy. I'm surprised about that. And may not be able to get back into the country for the next 3 to 6 months, leave without pay until he gets back into the country. That's certainly an option. You could use that, but you will be, not that there's huge amounts, he will be accruing some holiday pay in that period of time as well, based on that subsidy. It's a bit of a tricky one because nobody knows what that border re-entry is going to look like at the moment, Lisa. And I think it's another one of those scenarios that you would possibly say, let's do it for this period, let's review at this time frame, we'll review again here, this is subject to X and Y, being really clear about what those options might look like.
Yeah, and I would be clear that the subsidy is only for a limited time, and after that you'll need to review, because at some point this person is going to need money and need to make a decision, can they earn money whichever country they're in and you not have to pay them or not. So it is going to be really difficult for that one, but you need to be upfront and ask for good communication from their end as well as your end and things like that.
I think the magical 12 weeks is kind of the time frame that you might hold a role open, and then after that you might also be thinking about whether actually, if you can't get back into the country for 6 months, can I still realistically hold a job open? And those questions are going to sit around availability of skills in the marketplace for the jobs that you want and things like that. So you start to get into the realms of, I guess, frustration of contract at some point, but I would be at least wanting to hold a job open for the duration of the subsidy period.
Absolutely. Offline, June also asked a question around, the start and finish dates for the wage subsidy application. We got asked this a couple of weeks ago as well. She asked whether, does it start on the 17th of March for the 12 weeks, or does it start on the 27th of March for the next 12 weeks, or is it the date the application was made and the money was received in the bank? So there was some clarification earlier on in the piece around the 23rd of March, but within that payroll week. So depending on, how your pay week or fortnight or month actually is established. So you might want to have a look at that, June. But yeah, it's that clarity around when does the 12 weeks start and finish. Leslie Ann, have you been asked that question before as well?
There's a couple of parts floating around that. First of all, the qualifying period for the wage subsidy is from 1 January to 9 June. So if your business is expected to be or is under 30% below in any 1 month in that time. And then the second part to that is, at which point did you decide actually it's going to be an issue for my business and I need to apply for that wage subsidy? So for example, our tourism industry applied for that really early because they were hit very, very early. But some other businesses are just now saying, actually, now it's becoming evident that we are going to be 30% below our normal turnover. So we will actually now apply for the wage subsidy. So I think really it goes back to the point at which you decided, actually, we are going to be down, and that's when we might start to look at using the wage subsidy from that date. So I think there's a floating date for most businesses.
Absolutely. Cool. All right. I'm just conscious of time. Do hop online and ask any other questions that you may have. We've got a couple of more minutes left. Just want to spend the last few minutes thinking about this wonderful utopia of potentially returning to work. And, I think there's going to be a lot more information available about this, but the reading I've been doing in the last week and some of the advice that I've heard is this concept of, how we keep together at a distance. And every single workplace is going to be very different, whether you're an essential worker, which they've already been dealing with a lot of this, or whether you're, a business, perhaps an accountant or a manufacturer or a food producer. How do you keep your business operational, but at a distance? So what are some of the things that you might need to consider if you're working in an office environment? Can you have your workspaces and desks moved further apart so that they're not, so close? What could you have to do now, leading up to potential reopen that will you have to plan for? What are some of the things you're going to have to adjust in your workplaces? And it may be that if we're still working from home in another 4 weeks, as an employer, do you have some obligations about workspaces at home and ergonomics and, availability of information at home as well? Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about PPE and the ministry's been really clear about what PPE should be used at any given time, and access to PPE. I know that's been another really big issue. I'm hopeful that we'll get a lot of clarity about that. But obviously, as an employer, you have some health and safety obligations to look after your employees and keep them safe. So now is a good time to be thinking about, gosh, will I need to actually invest in PPE? Is there something that I, need to be starting to order in advance, considering now we've got these big delays of delivery, those sorts of things. So if you're an employer, take time now to think about, what does this mean if my staff have to go back to work next week or are coming back to work, or even in 2 weeks' time? Also, some of the things around travel restrictions. We know under level 3, even that in the previous world, there were travel restrictions, but, what does that mean about getting around even just your community? Would you have employees traveling together in the same car? Probably not, so there's all of those things that you may want to give consideration to. We now know that face-to-face meetings, as much as we all love them, it's not the end of the world if we have to move to this type of environment. So where could they be brought in? Where could the more virtual or online meetings be held rather than having a team meeting where you all have to come to work? But we also know that there will be more information coming out this week and next week around that. But Leslie Ann, any views, what are some of the things your clients are asking around, gosh, if we do return to work, what should I be considering?
Some of those aspects around it, having those workspaces well set out. Other clients are considering whether they actually have some staff alternating, working at home, working at work, so they have a team A, team B. And so team A may go in on week 1 and team B may go in on week 2, and they just keep alternating. Travel is the one challenge I think that staff is starting to say is, if we have 2 staff going off, what do we do? Really, I'm waiting for a bit more information to come out about level 3 and level 2 because that will probably help guide us what we can do and what we can't do. And I'm expecting that it might be a little bit different for different industries and different regions.
Very much so. Any thoughts, Meredith, on the concepts around return to work?
Sorry, I was responding to someone's inquiry about if we make someone redundant. So I'll come back to that one. Returning to work. No, just support the comments that you've made.
Sure. All good. Look, actually, there's a good question that's come in about if we go to level 3 and staff refusing to come to work. And Leslie Ann and Meredith and I were having this conversation earlier on, is that next week, in next week's webinar, this will be an area that we'll cover in a bit more detail as well, because actually returning to work where other community places are still closed down, like schools, for example, if they're still closed down, or people are fearful, those sorts of things, what position does that put the employer in? So we will cover that, but that is something that you could start to think about now. The reality is, I think that schools are not going to be returning with abandon. We may see a phased approach coming in, and as an employer, just because we move a level doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to return to normal. So write down out of your head what are all those scenarios that your workforce are likely to come up with. Gosh, will I have a full workforce? Could I do a rotating platform? Could we do more from home? Can we do lots of things differently? And it's not a simple thing, isn't it, to think about people refusing to come to work.
Can I just pick up on this one, because I think it's really important. Somebody asked, how do we replace someone who we've made redundant? If we make someone redundant, how can we replace their role? The answer is you can't. If you need that role, you can't make someone redundant. If you, in your, for business needs, you need to work out how you have less staff, financial reasons in this situation, then you need to work out how each aspect of that role can be carried out by other people if you still need the various tasks done. But you can't make someone redundant and then go and employ someone into the same role. Okay? That completely goes against the whole philosophy of needing to make someone redundant. So I just say that if you're thinking of that, or if it's confusing for you, please ring us and get advice. We'd much rather talk you through it before you go down that track than have to help you recover from that afterwards.
Yeah, and I think even, the whole, oh, well, I'm going to cut your job up into 6 different places and give it to 6 different people, you need to be careful about that as well, because if the job in its entirety is still there, but you're splitting it up, you may be asked about, well, surely that is still a job. So, get the good advice around that, because, you need to be able to have the strong business case to respond to that.
And one other thought, if you've made someone redundant because you genuinely thought it was appropriate, went through a good process, and then business picks up and you go, oh my goodness, we actually need this role again, then you need to go back to the person that you just made redundant. Okay, they have the right to that job for a reasonable period of time before you employ someone else into it.
A couple of more questions. Sorry, I had a feeling that the chat had been turned off, but I noticed there's a couple sitting in there, but most of those questions have been answered. Thank you. If we're recruiting new employees during the qualifying period, can we apply for a wage subsidy for them? Yes, you can. So as soon as that person comes on your books and becomes an employee, if you already got the wage subsidy for others, you can apply for that new employee as well. And then another question around staff that work 4 hours on a Saturday on a roster basis, so they do 1 Saturday every 3 weeks. Do we still need to pay those hours while under full lockdown? So I'm not sure who's asked that question, but it may depend on what subsidies you've applied for, if any, if they're a casual, or whether, I doubt that they're a casual, but they're a permanent part-timer, and if you're on full lockdown, what does that mean? So you've probably got a subsidy question you could be asking for those people, but you would only be paying them what they're entitled to, not the full 350 for under 20 hours a week. So just, yeah, have a think about, you know, what subsidies you have or haven't applied for already.
The other side to that is if it's a full-timer who also works a Saturday 1 and 3, then yes, it's a regular part of their work, and yes, you do need to keep it going. However, if you've had the negotiation and consultation and you're going to 80%, then it's 80% of those hours too.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Wonderful. Look, I think we're coming to the end of our time together. Gosh, this hour goes really quickly, or is it just me? I would invite you to reach out to any of the team. We are definitely here to help you. Novelle's going to come back online now and just talk about the support that's available, the fully funded support. I've also popped up the numbers for Leslie and ourselves and website addresses. So hop in, grab the information. If you're needing support, we are definitely here for you. And thank you again, Leslie Ann and Meredith, for helping us out this morning. Novelle, if I can flick back to you.
Oh, thank you, Senga. Thank you, Leslie Ann and Meredith too. So if you need any help, support, I'll just keep it simple. Send an email to us at businessgrowth@tewaka.nz, or you can ring our number 078570538. Any questions, anything regarding the support funding that's available, just contact us. We'll schedule a Zoom meeting and we'll talk it through. We're trying to get to all the inquiries as soon as we can, but we are under the pump at the moment, but we'll do our best to get back to you. Don't hesitate to contact us. You can go to our website, that'll be the easiest, tewaka.nz, to get more information. So, thank you. I'll finish off with a closing karakia. Kia tau te rangi marie ki runga I ngā tangata katoa o te ao, haumie hui praekie. Thank you, everyone.
Kia ora. Thank you, everybody. Same time next week, 11 o'clock on Wednesday. The update hopefully will be quite thorough in terms of what we get available from information from the government, and we'll be online to answer any other questions you might have. In the meantime, wrap up warm. Winter has arrived, it appears, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.